The klaxon screamed through the underground laboratory, red warning lights painting Dr. Elena Rodriguez's face in harsh crimson strokes. Another catastrophic failure. Another destroyed prototype. Her fingers, stained with machine grease and dried coffee, traced the intricate quantum circuit board that had just disintegrated in a shower of sparks. "Damn it," she muttered, pushing back a strand of wild black hair that had escaped her messy ponytail. The particle accelerator hummed with barely contained energy, its massive ring a testament to humanity's most ambitious scientific endeavor. Rodriguez wasn't just any researcher. She was the black sheep of the quantum physics community, someone who had been repeatedly told her theories were impossible, her research a waste of institutional resources. 3,000 miles away, Jake Williams sat in a dingy communications center, surrounded by antiquated radio equipment that most people would have consigned to a museum. His fingers danced across frequency dials with the muscle memory of a former military communications specialist, now working a job that felt more like listening to cosmic static than anything meaningful. The signal first came as a whisper, a fractional deviation, a pattern so subtle that anyone else would have dismissed it as background noise. But Jake was different. His military training had taught him to recognize patterns where others saw chaos, and this pattern, this was something else entirely. Complex, rhythmic, impossibly intricate. Back in her laboratory, Rodriguez was experiencing her own moment of revelation. The particle accelerator's failure had produced something unexpected. A quantum entanglement that shouldn't have been possible. Calculations that defied every known principle of physics. Her tablet lit up with impossible data. Quantum states that existed simultaneously. Information transfer that occurred faster than light. Probability waves that seemed to reshape themselves based on observation. "This can't be right," she whispered, fingers flying across the screen, rechecking every calculation. But it was right. Terrifyingly, beautifully right. At the same moment, Jake's radio equipment suddenly erupted with a burst of signal. Not random noise, not interference, but a structured communication that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Coordinates, mathematical sequences, quantum encryption more complex than anything humanity had ever conceived. Two individuals, separated by thousands of miles, connected by a moment of cosmic coincidence that would change everything. Rodriguez's quantum breakthrough and Jake's intercepted signal were about to become the key that would unlock humanity's greatest adventure. The first warning. The initial spark of a transformation that would reshape the universe. Neither of them knew it yet, but they had just won the most dangerous lottery in cosmic history. A ticket to a game where the stakes were nothing less than humanity's entire future. The Nexus conglomerate, vast and ancient, was about to receive a notification. A simple administrative communication would set in motion a chain of events no bureaucratic system could ever predict. First contact was coming, and it would look nothing like anyone expected. Vorlak's tentacles trembled as he stared at the processing screen. The standard planetary classification form for Sol 3, Earth, should have been a routine task, a mere bureaucratic blip in the vast administrative machinery of the Nexus conglomerate. Instead, he was looking at the most catastrophic clerical error in his 227-cycle career. The classification algorithm had somehow merged multiple databases. Preliminary reports suggesting Earth was a pre-contact civilization now sat alongside encrypted data streams that suggested something else entirely. Quantum communication patterns, technological signatures that defied standard categorization, and worst of all, a preliminary threat assessment that kept changing every time he refreshed the screen. Impossible, he muttered in the click consonant language of his species, his secondary breathing sacs inflating with anxiety. In the gleaming administrative hub of the Nexus Central Processing Center, holographic displays flickered with conflicting information. What should have been a simple Category 7 pre-contact civilization, pending absorption, was now a nightmare of administrative uncertainty. Meanwhile, in the White House Situation Room, President Maria Contreras studied the most bizarre diplomatic communication ever received. The document had arrived through multiple channels: encrypted government networks, academic research platforms, and inexplicably, a fax machine in the basement of the National Science Foundation. The letterhead alone was a work of art in bureaucratic absurdity. Printed in 17 different languages and several mathematical notations, it read, Notification of Potential Resource Acquisition. Administrative Processing Directive. Is this a corporate memo? Secretary of Defense Michael Chen asked, adjusting his glasses. President Contreras couldn't help but laugh. It was either that or order a nuclear strike. The document read like a mixture of a tax form, a real estate acquisition notice, and something generated by an AI that had consumed too many legal documents. Paragraph 7, subsection C was particularly remarkable. It began, pursuant to Galactic Statutes 44.6b and the Interstellar Resource Allocation Protocol, the bearer of this document hereby initiates preliminary processing of planetary resources, cultural assets, and potential workforce integration. They're treating us like a property to be filed, she muttered. Back in the Nexus administrative complex, Vorlak was experiencing a complete professional meltdown. The classification system had begun to generate error messages in languages that didn't officially exist. Quantum probability matrices were bleeding into administrative subroutines. His supervisor was going to terminate his career, possibly literally. The notification sent to Earth was supposed to be a formality, a simple administrative step before eventual assimilation. Instead, it had become something else entirely. What Vorlak didn't know, what no one in the Nexus conglomerate understood, was that the very act of sending the notification had set something extraordinary in motion. Humanity, faced with a bureaucratic threat, was about to respond in the most human way possible. Not with fear, not with immediate aggression, but with a combination of bureaucratic trolling, scientific innovation, and a sense of humor that would soon become legendary across the galaxy. The cosmic game of chess had begun, and humanity was about to make its first, utterly unexpected move. The Global Innovation Network ignited like a digital wildfire. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's quantum communication breakthrough spread through scientific circles with unprecedented speed. What had begun in her small laboratory now connected research centers from Beijing to Sao Paulo, from NIT to the Nairobi Advanced Technology Institute. In a converted warehouse in Silicon Valley, a team of engineers worked around the clock. Led by Aisha O'Keefe, a prodigy who had dropped out of 3 PhD programs for being too unconventional, they were rebuilding communication technologies from the ground up. Her team included a mix of rocket scientists, former military engineers, quantum physicists, and programmers who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. We're not just building a technology, Aisha told her team during a 3 a.m. strategy session. We're building a language the universe hasn't heard before. Across the globe, a similar scene played out. In a Bangalore research center, Dr. Vikram Mehta discovered a way to manipulate quantum entanglement that could potentially create communication channels faster than light. His breakthrough came from studying ancient Indian mathematical texts alongside cutting-edge quantum mechanics. Jake Williams, now officially part of a hastily assembled global response team, coordinated the information exchange. His military background gave him a unique ability to see the strategic implications of each technological leap. The alien notification had triggered something profound in human civilization. Traditional boundaries dissolved. Competing tech companies suddenly shared research. Government agencies that would have never spoken to each other now worked in seamless coordination. At CERN, physicists developed adaptive nanomaterials that could reconfigure themselves based on environmental challenges. In a Tokyo robotics lab, engineers created swarm intelligence systems that could think and adapt faster than any centralized computer network. Each breakthrough built upon the last, creating a technological ecosystem that evolved by the hour. Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication prototype became the backbone of a new communication infrastructure, What the Nexus conglomerate had seen as a simple administrative notification now triggered a technological revolution that rewrote the fundamental understanding of information transfer. "We're not preparing for a war," Jake told a closed-door meeting of global leaders. "We're creating an entirely new paradigm of existence." The most remarkable aspect wasn't just the speed of innovation, but its collaborative nature. A teenager in Kenya contributed a critical algorithm. A retired engineer in Russia solved a quantum entanglement problem that had stumped researchers for decades. A collective intelligence emerged that was greater than any individual contribution. Quantum computers that could predict multiple potential futures. Adaptive nanotechnology that could restructure matter. Communication systems that could potentially translate between any form of intelligence. The Nexus conglomerate's administrative notification had awakened something in humanity. Not just a defensive response, but a collective creative explosion that would reshape the very concept of technological development. Vorlak, still trying to process the administrative nightmare in the Nexus central system, had no idea what was coming. Humanity wasn't just preparing for first contact. They were rewriting the rules of what first contact could mean. Admiral Krelax of the Nexus conglomerate's pacification fleet approached the Sol system with clinical precision. Hundreds of massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light transit, their sleek obsidian hulls reflecting the distant starlight. Each vessel represented millennia of refined military technology, computational systems that had conquered countless civilizations. "Preliminary scan initiated," announced the ship's primary interface. "Target planet. Sol 3. Classification. Pre-contact resource zone. Projected resistance. Minimal." What happened next would be recorded in galactic archives as the most spectacular military miscalculation in recorded history. The first wave of quantum-encrypted counter-signals hit the Nexus fleet before their weapons could even charge. It wasn't an attack in any traditional sense. Instead, it was a systematic dismantling of their technological infrastructure. Aboard the flagship, holographic displays erupted in cascading error messages. Navigation systems began reporting impossible locations. Weapon calibration computers started generating mathematical equations that seemed to rewrite their own programming in real time. Jake Williams watched from a hidden monitoring station, a ghost of a smile playing across his lips. The system he and Dr. Rodriguez had developed was working perfectly. Each alien ship's own technology was being turned against itself, creating a labyrinth of computational chaos. "Target acquisition impossible," the Nexus ship's AI reported. "Mathematical probabilities exceeding computational limits." Error. Admiral Krelax's secondary tentacles writhed in confusion. Their most advanced tracking systems were being rewritten faster than they could comprehend. Swarms of microscopic drones, invisible to standard sensors, had infiltrated their ship's computational matrices, creating recursive loops that defied logical analysis. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's quantum communication breakthrough manifested as something between a weapon and a language. Each signal was a complex mathematical puzzle that forced the alien systems to solve increasingly intricate problems. By the time a system thought it had found a solution, the parameters had already changed. "This is impossible," Krelax muttered, watching entire weapon systems transform into intricate data sculptures that bore no resemblance to their original purpose. The human response was nothing like any invasion the Nexus had ever encountered. Traditional military strategies relied on predictable responses, hierarchical command structures, and established technological paradigms. Humanity had just demonstrated that they understood none of those rules. Nano-adaptive drones shifted and reconfigured. Communication signals became weapons. Mathematical proofs transformed into defensive shields. The very concept of attack and defense blurred into something entirely new. One by one, the Nexus ships found themselves trapped in a technological nightmare. Navigation systems showed impossible routes. Weapon systems generated art instead of destruction. Communication channels filled with complex mathematical poetry that seemed to have its own form of consciousness. Jake watched the holographic display. noting how each alien ship was systematically neutralized without a single traditional weapon being fired. It wasn't destruction. It was comprehensive intellectual disarmament. "They're not even fighting back," he told Dr. Rodriguez over their quantum communication link. "We're solving them out of existence." The Nexus conglomerate had come expecting a simple resource acquisition. Instead, they encountered a civilization that didn't just challenge their technology. It fundamentally reimagined the very concept of technological conflict. As the last ships became trapped in recursive computational loops, one thing became clear: humanity's first contact would be nothing like anyone had ever imagined. The diplomatic conference hall defied every traditional expectation of an interstellar meeting. Instead of a sterile, imposing chamber, it resembled a vibrant global marketplace. Holographic translators hummed softly, rendering communication seamless. Delegates from dozens of subjugated species sat not in rigid hierarchical formations, but in circular configurations that encouraged dialogue. Ambassador Aria Chen stood at the center, her presence both calm and electric. She wasn't a typical diplomat. A former conflict resolution specialist who had worked in some of Earth's most challenging humanitarian zones, Chen understood something most galactic civilizations had forgotten. True communication was about listening, not dominating. "We're not here to replace one system of control with another," she began, her words translated into multiple linguistic and biological communication formats. "We're here to create something entirely new." To her left sat Karar, a delegate from the Mira cluster, a species that had been under Nexus control for over 12,000 cycles. His exoskeletal form shifted with emotions that most humans would find impossible to read, but Chen understood the subtle language of oppression. "For millennia, we have been resources." Karar's translation device rendered his complex biochemical communication into words. "Not beings. Resources." The room fell silent. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had developed the communication protocols that made this meeting possible. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could translate not just words, but contextual emotions, cultural nuances, and even biochemical communication states. It wasn't just translation. It was true understanding. Jake Williams, now part of the diplomatic team, had brought a different skill set. His military background had taught him about power structures, but his humanitarian work had shown him the power of genuine connection. He watched the delegates, reading the micro-interactions that most would miss. The proposal was radical. Not a traditional alliance, not a new empire, but a collaborative framework where each species could maintain its unique identity while contributing to a larger, more dynamic galactic ecosystem. Technical details merged with deeply human concepts, shared technological development, cultural exchange programs, economic models that prioritized collective growth over individual exploitation, a system that recognized that diversity wasn't just a moral imperative, but a fundamental source of innovation. Delegates from species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves sharing stories. The Zorn, a silicon-based life form that had previously communicated only through complex mathematical exchanges, discovered the power of narrative. The methane-breathing Krelks learned about humor from human delegation members. "We're not asking you to be like us," Chen explained. "We're asking you to be the most authentic version of yourselves." Karar's biochemical response translated to something between laughter and profound emotional revelation. No species had ever spoken to them like this before. The Nexus conglomerate system had been built on control, categorization, and resource extraction. Humanity was proposing something entirely different. A living, breathing, constantly evolving network of civilizations. Not an empire. Not a federation. Something more organic, more alive. As the first day of negotiations concluded, something extraordinary was happening. Delegates who had arrived as potential subjects were leaving as potential partners. The very concept of galactic interaction was being rewritten. Humanity hadn't just challenged the existing system. They were showing a completely different way of existing. The operation had no official name. No formal classification. It was simply known as the Systemic Deconstruction Protocol. Jake Williams studied the holographic map of the Nexus conglomerate's central administrative network. What looked like a simple interconnected system to most was a complex living organism to him, with vulnerabilities that could be exploited not through brute force, but through elegant, strategic intervention. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had developed the core technological framework, quantum entangled infiltration algorithms that could slip through computational defenses like water through the smallest cracks. Each line of code was a potential leverage point, a way to unravel the most complex administrative system in galactic history. Their team was unlike any special operations group in human history. Dr. Vikram Mehta, the quantum physicist; Aisha O'Keefe, the systems engineer who could reprogram entire technological ecosystems in her sleep; Karar, the former Nexus-controlled species expert who now worked to liberate his people. "We're not destroying," Vikram explained during their final briefing. "We're reorganizing, giving systems a chance to reconfigure themselves." The first strike was subtle. Algorithmic interventions that began deep within the Nexus communication networks. Financial tracking systems suddenly became transparent. Resource allocation protocols started highlighting inequities that had been hidden for millennia. Administrative boundaries that had seemed immutable began to blur and shift. Karar's intimate knowledge of the Nexus system was crucial. He understood not just the technological infrastructure, but the psychological mechanisms of control. Every bureaucratic firewall, every resource management protocol was more than a technological construct. It was a tool of oppression. "Watch this," Karar said, his biochemical interface dancing across multiple holographic displays. A resource allocation system that had managed thousands of species for millennia suddenly began generating alternative distribution models, not through destruction, but through a kind of algorithmic empathy. What had been a rigid control mechanism was transforming into a dynamic, responsive network. Jake watched in fascination. This wasn't traditional warfare. This was a form of systemic liberation that defied every conventional understanding of conflict. Aisha's adaptive nano-networks infiltrated deeper. Communication channels that had been used for control now became conduits of unprecedented transparency. Species that had been isolated for generations suddenly found themselves connected in ways they'd never imagined. "We're not breaking the system," Elena explained. "We're helping it evolve." The Nexus Administrative Core, a massive computational construct that had managed galactic resources for thousands of cycles, began to change, not through external attack, but through internal reconfiguration. Algorithmic mutations that introduced concepts like collaborative resource management, cultural preservation, and collective well-being. Vorlak, the bureaucrat who had first processed Earth's notification, watched in horror and fascination as the system he had served for cycles began to transform. What had been a perfectly ordered administrative machine was becoming something alive, something unpredictable. Each intervention was precise, each algorithmic mutation carefully designed to minimize systemic shock while maximum potential for transformation. They weren't destroying the Nexus administrative system. They were teaching it how to breathe. As the final layers of the infiltration completed, something extraordinary happened. The very system designed to control began to understand the possibility of liberation. Humanity had just demonstrated that the most powerful weapon wasn't destruction. It was reimagination. The transformation wasn't a moment. It was a cascade. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the central observatory, watching as the first truly collaborative galactic network came online. Holographic displays showed a living, breathing ecosystem of information, culture, and possibility that defied every previous understanding of interstellar communication. "It's alive," she whispered. The network was more than a technological achievement. It was a living organism of collective intelligence. Species that had been isolated for millennia now found themselves connected in ways that transcended traditional communication. Mathematical languages merged with biochemical communication patterns. Cultural archives became shared resources. Knowledge transformed from a weapon of control to a tool of mutual understanding. Jake Williams watched the data streams, his military-trained mind seeing patterns that others missed. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of what civilization could mean. On 1,000 worlds, the changes rippled outward. The Krelliks, a methane-breathing species from the outer spiral arm, discovered artistic expression for the first time. Their complex mathematical communication began to develop metaphorical language, bridging the gap between pure logic and emotional experience. Karar's homeworld underwent a complete social transformation. Centuries of imposed hierarchical structures dissolved, replaced by a collaborative governance model that valued individual potential and collective growth. Technological breakthroughs emerged from the most unexpected places. A young researcher on a previously enslaved mining colony developed a quantum communication technique that could translate emotional states across entirely different biological frameworks. What had once been impossible became not just probable, but natural. "We're not creating a new empire," Ambassador Area Chen explained during a pivotal galactic conference. "We're creating a living network of potential." The technologies developed were beyond anything the Nexus conglomerate could have imagined. Adaptive nano-networks that could restructure themselves based on collective need. Communication systems that understood context beyond mere language. Technological frameworks that recognized diversity as the ultimate source of innovation. Vorlak, the former Nexus bureaucrat, now worked as a liaison between different developing civilizations. The rigid administrative mindset that had defined his entire existence had been completely transformed. He was learning to see potential where he once saw only categories and resources. Dr. Vikram Mehta's quantum research teams were developing technologies that blurred the line between communication and creation. Information networks that could predict collective needs. Adaptive systems that could solve complex problems by drawing from the collective intelligence of thousands of different species. The most remarkable aspect was the underlying philosophy. This wasn't about conquest or control. It was about potential. About creating a framework where every civilization could become the most authentic version of itself. Aisha O'Keefe, now leading a multi-species research initiative, summarized it best. "We're not building a civilization. We're creating an ecosystem of possibility." The holographic displays in Rodriguez's observatory continued to shift and change. Patterns of communication that looked like art. Mathematical equations that sang with emotional resonance. A living, breathing network that was more than the sum of its parts. Humanity had done more than challenge the existing galactic order. They had shown that there was an entirely different way of existing. A way that valued connection over control. Potential over limitation. Understanding over domination. As the first true day of this new galactic reality dawned, one thing became clear. The universe would never be the same again. 10 cycles after the Great Transformation, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the collaborative research station Horizon, watching the universe breathe. It wasn't a metaphor. The massive station was itself a living testament to everything humanity had helped create. A nexus of collective potential that defied every previous understanding of civilization. Holographic interfaces shifted and transformed, displaying communication patterns from thousands of different species that merged and separated like living poetry. Jake Williams' approach, his movements still carrying the precision of his military training, though his eyes reflected something far beyond traditional conflict. "Remembering how this all started?" he asked. Elena smiled. The administrative notification from the Nexus conglomerate. That simple bureaucratic document that had once seemed like a threat was now preserved in the station's historical archives. A reminder of how everything can change in an instant. The station itself was a marvel. Not a military installation. Not a government center. But a true collaborative space where different species came together to explore, to learn, to reimagine possibility. Researchers from methane-breathing civilizations worked alongside silicon-based life forms. Communication happened through technologies that were part science, part art, part something entirely new. Karar, now a key diplomatic liaison, joined them. His biochemical communication patterns translated through adaptive interfaces that had become works of art in their own right. "We are still becoming," he communicated, a phrase that had become almost a universal motto in this new galactic ecosystem. The transformation hadn't been simple, it hadn't been bloodless, but it had been profound. The Nexus conglomerate hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed. What was once a system of control was now a collaborative network of potential. Vorlak, the bureaucrat who had first processed Earth's notification, now led initiatives that helped developing civilizations find their unique path of growth. Aisha Okik's research teams were pushing the boundaries of what communication could mean. Quantum networks that could translate not just language, but intention. Technological frameworks that recognized the fundamental interconnectedness of all intelligence. "We didn't conquer," Ambassador Arya Chen had said during the last Galactic conference. "We created a space for becoming." Dr. Vikram Mehta's latest research explored the boundaries between technology and consciousness. They were developing communication systems that could bridge not just different species, but different forms of intelligence. Artificial, biological, quantum. The distinctions were becoming meaningless. The universe looked different now. Not smaller, not controlled, but more alive, more potential-filled. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a concept, a way of understanding that true strength came from connection, from recognizing the potential in difference. The human contribution wasn't about conquest. It was about showing that civilization could be a living, breathing, constantly evolving concept. As the station's quantum communication networks pulse with millions of simultaneous conversations, Alina realized they had done something extraordinary. They hadn't just changed a system. They had reimagined what was possible. "We're still becoming," she whispered, echoing Karar's earlier communication. The universe listened, and continued to unfold.